We're at the 23rd Annual Miami Book Fair International. The Book TV bus is at the festival this year. And inside is Myra MacPherson, who's the author of this book, All Governments Lie, The Life and Times of Rebel Journalist I.F. Stone. When did you first meet I.F. Stone?
In 1977, I covered one of his anniversaries. I mean, I can't remember now, but it was their wedding anniversary. And I had covered him. I'd read about him, but I had not met him until then. And I met him and his wife and fell madly in love with both of them. He was one of the great troublemakers of Washington, and of course we all knew who he was, even if we hadn't met him personally.
Who were you writing for?
I was writing for the Washington Post. And I did this profile, and I still remember his conversations about his marriage, in which he said that the weekly had become such a success that if it had gotten in, and his wife had been the chief cook and bottle washer and did everything with him, and he said if it had gotten any more successful, he would have had to have become a bigamist. And I always thought he was wonderful. Of course, he had stopped the weekly in '71.
At what point in time did you decide to write this biography?
Actually, '91. Well, I should say '90, and was I knew him well after that period of time. In '88, I was at one of his last press conference meetings or press meetings at the press club, and when he died in '89, I just thought what a treasure trove of journalism, and it was important to write about him. And then as I continued on, I ended up finding the FBI files, which were like 5,000 pages on I.F. Stone, a man who never had any secrets, never told anybody anything other than he told his massive audience at that period, because he'd been writing about the Vietnam War. And but I was just fascinated with what I found in the FBI files, which was just this constant tracking of a major civilian person and spending all our taxpayers' money on doing an awful lot of damage, which was what J. Edgar Hoover was famous for.
So you really spent 16 years?
No, I stopped and did another book. Mm-hmm. After my mother died, I did a book on illness, loss, and grief, and then came back to this book, and it kept haunting me, and I just felt that I had to finish it.
At what point in time did I.F. Stone jump from regular journalist to superstar?
Well, actually, he had about 3 different periods in his life. The first period of his life was in the early 30s and 40s, and he was breaking scoop after scoop about Hitler and about World War II and what was going on with the cartels, and PM magazine, which was a major New York paper, and also for The Nation. And then he went into the weekly and started that, frankly, because he didn't have a job. As he used to joke, he said that on every paper I worked, I always thought they would close on Monday, and they always did. And so he had to find his own job. And what happened is he started in '53, which was the period of the McCarthy witch hunts, a terrible time for a lefty journalist to start anything. And he just incrementally crept up and crept up. And then he was the first journalist in America to write about the Gulf of Tonkin. It was 2 weeks after LBJ said that this was the excuse for going into Vietnam. People who don't remember this time frame, this was a time when they said that some little fishing boats had targeted one of our ships. And Izzy went through the documents, as he was always famous for doing, and said, if there's no debris here, what really went on? And it's very, very reminiscent of what's happened with weapons of mass destruction. And of course, he became a superhero to the anti-war movement, and he became rich and famous. And that was in 1970. And 68 to 70, and then he started writing a book on Socrates, and had a bestseller at the age of 80. His life just kept going on. It was the great trajectory of a great American story of success.
And his writings were what made him famous, or was it him speaking and talking and his personality?
Oh, it's a total combination. One of the great lines he had about weapons of mass destruction, at least I call it weapons of mass destruction, was what he wrote back during the Vietnam period, was he was talking about the fact that one had to beware of lies, and All Governments Lie, the title, comes from his full quote, which was, "All governments lie, but disaster lies in wait for countries whose leaders smoke the same hashish they give out." And he was writing, of course, about the Vietnam period. But he was very witty and very funny, and he always had these pithy one-liners. But his whole being and persona was based on a scholarly look at what went on historically. So he had a point of reference for everything. And on top of that, he was quite able to transcend past things and make it applicable for today. And a great reader, I mean, Jon Stewart would have loved to have him as a guest writer because he was so witty and provocative. But he also did enormous research. His whole concept was read the documents, don't listen to what the people are telling you at the top, go into the bowels of government, find your own people. Do not get cozy with the top officials. And as we have seen today, that's a classic example of how to be a good journalist.
It sounds like journalism 101.
It absolutely
What
is.
impact did he have at that time on
He had an
journalism?
enormous impact. I think, the book is full of interviews with people who were influenced by him. Large, small, some named, some not. Cy Hirsch is one of them. Many of today's journalists, Carl Bernstein, they treasured what Izzy did. And he also had an impact far beyond just his 70,000 readership, which is in itself quite phenomenal for a little 4-page weekly. But what he did with that was it had so much information in it, and it started filtering into every other area. In fact, one of the leaders of the LA Times and the New York Times said that we started having Izzy around to talk to because he knew more than a lot of us did. And it was because he was always out there relentlessly pursuing everything. So he became a role model for a very good collection of younger journalists.
Besides the FBI files, what other files and papers did you have access to write this?
Well, I went into all of the later files that came out of the Cold War period, including North Korea, China, and Russia, and pulled up all the files about what Izzy was writing at the time to do a comparison point. I also compared him with Walter Lippmann, who was one of the people who was considered the great establishment sage, and found out that Izzy was far more prescient and on the mark than Walter Lippmann was about so many areas of Washington and national news from the 20s on through the 70s. So he's a true hero to a lot of people.
What was his relationship with presidents?
He didn't have one. He was not one of these people who said the presidents I have known. He felt distancing was more important. One of the interesting things about Izzy, too, is that he was going deaf at the age of 30. And so he learned to read because he wasn't sure that he could trust what he was hearing adequately in those days. And, of course, that was pre-tape recorders, etc. And so he started doing a lot of documentary reading, and that was where he became so honored and revered by people. He didn't have friends in the White House. He was not that kind of guy.
Was he considered an opinion journalist at the time?
Yes and no. He did all kinds of things. He was a straight journalist, just straight, as he said, bird dog reporting, and he broke stories. He broke the stories about American cartels still doing business with Nazi Germany in 1940, 41, before we entered the war. He was also an opinion essayist, but he always labeled it opinion and essay. You always knew where he was going with that. And he became known as a real scholar. I mean, this was a man who, as I said, graduated third in his class, but that's third from the last in high school, and he never finished college. And he became a great autodidact. He taught himself everything from the early Greek era straight on through, and he used everything he could possibly use to study what he was doing. Somebody said he would have been a great lawyer. He also asked those tough lawyer-like questions. He used to say to journalists, don't ask a question unless you know what their answer is going to be, and be sure that you can track it with whether that's a correct answer or just something that they're giving you, you know, and so on.
His critics at the time, who were they and how powerful were they?
Well, J. Edgar Hoover was the major critic, and they chased him. They went through his garbage. They chased him into the cigar store. They chased every conversation he ever had. All you could hear him saying often was "what," and this was all illegal. If it was not illegal, it was often unethical. And McCarthy, he battled McCarthyism during the 50s when most Americans were cowed. You have to look at the book to realize just how badly the media had been affected by that period, and people were being fired for just simply whether or not they had known a friend who was a communist 30 years earlier. So he was a true pariah in that period of time.
What's been the reaction that you've gotten on your book tour?
Amazing. What's been wonderful is that every review says it's so timely, even though it took me a long time. It's sort of hitting people right now with the concept of what's been going on for the last 5 years, both in American journalism and in the government that's been playing out.
How long did it take you to actually write this book? It's a pretty big tome.
Yeah, well, there's an awful lot of Izzy in it and a lot of quotes from him because he's such a wonderful writer that I want him to be a part of it. I think on and off, I would say it took me about 10 years. 10 years. I've written 3 other books before. None took as long.
This is the book. It's called All Governments Lie. It's a biography of I.F. Stone. The author is Myra MacPherson, and she's joining us at the Miami Book Fair. Thank you.
Thank you.